Rule 0, don't mess with cats. Rule 1, you don't talk about us. Rule 2, you don't talk about us. Rule 3, we are anonymous. Rule 4, we are legion. Rule 5, we do not forgive, we do not forget. Rule 6, anonymous can be a horrible, senseless, uncaring monster. Rule 7, anonymous is still able to deliver. Rule 8, there are no real rules about posting. Rule 9, there are no real rules about moderation either. Enjoy your ban. Rule 10, we are not your personal army. Rule 11, no matter how much you love debating, keep in mind that no one on the internet debates. Instead, they mock your intelligence as well as your parents. Rule 12, anything you say can and will be used against you. Rule 13, anything you say can and will be turned into something else. Rule 14, don't argue with trolls. It means they win. Welcome to Free the Mind, Free the People, a podcast where we empower each other through knowledge and discuss the issues that shape our everyday lives. All opinions and information shared on this podcast are held by the hosts alone and do not represent the stances of the University of Central Florida or the Department of Sociology. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Free the Mind, Free the People. I'm Hallie Spencer.
And I'm Annie Jones.
And this is our first episode of our third chapter where we are focusing on the media. And today's episode is going to be all about the internet specifically. And Annie and I are both children of the internet. We grew up with it. I played way too much Club Penguin in my time. So we were very excited about this series. And we want to talk about the internet because the media is our main socializer. You know, we used to learn about information through our school, our parents, church, all these different types of places. But with universities being restricted in what they teach, like the HB 999 law in Florida, people need to turn to the internet to understand the world around them. But what even is the internet? Who runs it? How is it structured? How is information shared? I can watch TV and find out that Fox News is run by Rupert Murdoch or that CNN is run by the Warner Media Company. But the internet is like a black hole of information, and it's scary and it's confusing to me. So I want to know what the deal is with the internet in 2023 and how it's affecting our lives. So we are going to be figuring that out today.
And so uncovering the pieces of that black hole aren't as mysterious as they seem to be, Hallie. But we have to take a careful sociological approach. And so for me, I tend to look to Foucault to help me historicize what's going on today. Or as Foucault said it, find a history of the present. And so just a little background, Michele Foucault was a social theorist we use in sociology to understand how dominant ideologies come to be. And Foucault specifically imagined social history much like that of physical history. So using comparable methods of archaeology, for example, to unearth our symbolic artifacts, and genealogy to connect those artifacts together into a broader understanding of how reality is constructed for certain people in certain time periods. And so we'd like to use these methods to attempt to unearth and connect some artifacts that shape today's understanding of the internet as a media institution.
That sounds like a great way to start looking at the internet. And to talk about our first artifact, Annie, do you remember 4chan's rules of the internet?
Oh my gosh. Are we really going this far back, Hallie?
We're going to go that far back.
Oh no.
So 4chan created this idea of the rules of the internet. And for those who don't know, 4chan was created by Christopher Poole, known online with his screen name Moot, on October 1st in 2003. Moot was 15 years old at the time, and he was inspired by a different website, 2channel. So for those who don't know, 4chan is a simple image-based bulletin board where anyone can post comments and share images. My mom asked me if 4chan was a rapper, so I wanted to explain what 4chan was first. But the website is divided into boards based on topics, interests, and hobbies. And so when I hear that, it kind of reminds me of Reddit, the way there are like subreddits for certain interests you have, and you can go there and post and read what other people have posted. But it has been referred to as the worst place on the internet, the internet's teenager, and simultaneously the best and worst of the internet. So who is this the best for?
Just a background, the 4chan is definitely historically and still today known for its lawlessness. 4chan has a handful of global rules, a very small handful of rules, which essentially boil down to advising the community to only post things that are within local or US law. So everything else is on the table there. And we kind of conceptualize 4chan as the Wild West, filled with edgy white young men with literally no rules, except for not to break the law. And this does track with who was using these spaces at the time that 4chan came out. And we'll also see this tracking with the ideologies that come out of 4chan in terms of what social problems are happening at the time, and how that's responded to through specifically the policing of spaces. So 4chan being a white male space that is policed.
Yeah, that's some great background. And I think knowing that background will help us understand the rules of the internet that they created. So, pretty quickly after 4chan's creation, they, as a group, created these rules of the internet for people to follow and understand as they navigate this new space. So I'm going to read through some of these rules and we're going to discuss them a bit, but you will start to realize that a lot of these rules that were created back in the early 2000s still structure the way we use the internet today. So keep that in mind as we read through them. So rule number 3, we are anonymous. Rule number 5, we do not forgive, we do not forget. And rule number 6, anonymous can be a horrible, senseless, uncaring monster.
They pretty much said we are anonymous, therefore we can be a horrible, senseless, uncaring monster, right? Because rule number 1 or rule number 3 is we are anonymous, and you said rule number 6 is that anonymous can be a horrible, senseless, uncaring monster. Did I hear that correctly, Hallie?
Yeah, that is correct. And so it's frustrating because they've stated that they're anonymous, but now they're putting distance between themselves and anonymous. So if anonymous is doing bad things, it's not them personally doing the bad things, it's anon, obviously. But, if we make up anonymous, that also means we can make anonymous not a horrible, senseless, uncaring monster. If we want anonymous to be kind and helpful, we have the ability to do that. That just means that we have to act that way.
This definitely, just in terms of those long-lasting effects, like people hiding behind anonymous usernames are definitely associated with being horrible, senseless, and uncaring, as opposed to being like kind and full of joy, right? So that's really interesting that you bring that kind of distancing up, and then again that social construction that has persisted way past kind of 4chan's prominence.
Right, and anyone who has used the internet has probably had a run-in with someone who's anonymous and not saying very kind things. So it's something that we can all be frustrated by, but also all are a part of. We can also all be a part of being anonymous at the same time. So that's very interesting. Moving on, rule number 8, there are no rules about posting. Rule number 11, no matter how much you love debating, keep in mind that no one on their internet debates. Instead, they mock your intelligence as well as your parents. Rule 12, anything you say can and will be used against you. And anything you say can and will be turned into something else. And lastly, rule 14, do not argue with trolls. It means they win.
Oh man, I've definitely heard that one today.
Yeah, so these are also things that we hear today, like the conception of trolls. Like we still talk about internet trolls constantly. And also the idea of like you can't debate with them. You really can't debate with anyone on the internet because it's not actually a debate. So those are 4 rules right there that really talk about how communication works on the internet, especially if you're disagreeing with someone, how that turns out.
I also think that cancel culture is kind of a product of some of these ideas. So the idea that anything you say can and will be used against you, and that anything you say will be turned into something else. Definitely, number 1, sets up a situation where like people are coming for you, right? Like who are these people that are using things against you and turning your words into something else, right? But there's that assumption that there's like that kind of group fighting already happening, right? And again, a lot of fear around people, not being allowed to say certain things or in certain contexts or words being misconstrued. A lot of our complaints about cancel culture really seem to come from this idea that anything you say can be used against you and that it will be turned into something else. It's interesting because it makes me think of how people are careful with language. But we're talking about that in a space that's known for its lawlessness. So we can keep going. I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, and I think these rules make everyone immediately feel defensive as soon as they get online. So like even if someone's trying to have a conversation with you, it's like, you are going to cancel me, you're going to do something and use my words against me. So everyone is immediately defenseless and like putting up their guards. So
and
that's
it goes back to going back to the earlier rules, the idea that they're all careless, senseless monsters, right? Underneath all of that, carries through, definitely.
Yeah, definitely. So moving forward, Rule 18, everything that can be labeled can be hated. Rule 20, nothing is to be taken seriously. Rule 29, on the internet, men are men, women are also men, and kids are undercover FBI agents. Rule 30, girls do not exist on the internet. And Rule 31, tits or GTFO, the choice is yours.
Those are some nice rules. As children of the internet, we've been illegal, I guess, because we are girls that exist online. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, so this is frustrating because these rules I've seen exist as I use the internet moving forward. Like, I just think it's interesting because they basically say women shouldn't exist on the internet, but if they do, it's only for their sexualization or objectification for their personal use. So it's really just like blocking off, saying like women are not allowed here. And if you are, just let you know, we will just be objectifying you. And this makes sense going back to like my Tumblr days. This was a huge theme there, women's sexualization, objectification. So yeah, it really is just blocking off 50% of the population from being able to use this space.
You know what, bringing it to the personal experiences, this reminds me of like, I can't tell you how many times I've gone into like a lobby in an online video game with voice chat where the first assumption is that I'm like a prepubescent boy. Like there's no way that this could be a girl. This is a boy before hitting puberty with like a less deep of a voice, right? So I've definitely had these experiences as well in terms of the idea that girls don't exist on the internet. Also the tits or GTFO. I've kind of had that experience, not in definitely explicitly, but also in a sense of like girls aren't allowed in this space, right? So more the GTFO part. So going into like a Counter-Strike game and being cornered until I decide to leave because it's no fun being cornered, right? So even in these like virtual spaces, there's the policing of space in that way. That's purely gendered, right? It's half the population belongs here and the other half doesn't, unless they're showing us their tits, right? And even then they still don't belong here. And so I wanted to throw in, because I do teach gender and I love our theory, our sociological theory, and so we have a term for this. We call this androcentrism, which is a word that describes a system that centers men. So for example, like when we talk about like other types of media, like movies, for example, we'll look at how a lot of the women in movies are conceptualized in a way to appeal to men, not other women. And I think that this list is screaming androcentrism to me, if I do say so myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, moving forward, there will be more rules that kind of go off of this. So Rule 34, if it exists, there's porn of it, no exceptions. Rule 35, if there's no porn of it, porn will be made of it. And those just tie into like the sexualization. Like nothing can exist on the internet without being sexualized, specifically women. But like there's no space for us otherwise. Rule 36, no matter how effed up it is, there's always worse than you just saw. Rule 42, nothing is sacred. Rule 43, the more beautiful and pure a thing is, the more satisfying it is to corrupt it. Rule 49, no matter what it is somebody's fetish. The one specifically about no matter what it is, it's somebody's fetish. I'm on a lot of like fashion spaces online, and I know someone who had to leave that space because they would post like their like get readies with me or like their fashion stuff, and they'd be wearing tights, and like men would comment about their tights like constantly and follow them for that specific reason, and they had to leave. They were forced out of their interest, their way to like make money as a creator, because this was not a space for them, and because they were being fetishized for something so minimal. So that like you can see that these rules are an ongoing way to like force people out of the space.
There's a running like meme that women like visually online can't show their feet or they will end up on a website called WikiFeet, which is literally a fetish website to collect pictures of people's feet and fetishize them. And although like men are definitely on WikiFeet as well, I think women bear the brunt of having like, for example, a body part like the feet fetishized without their consent. What's also interesting about these rules is they're kind of taking out women in an interesting way, and they're talking about it. So so if it exists, there is porn of it, right? They're talking about it. No matter what it is somebody's fetish. So it's interesting to me because this goes beyond just like the sexualization of half the population. This is the sexualization of everything, right? We'll go into some of this in a little bit, but the sexualization of everything goes beyond gender-based dominance, and I think it speaks to dominance in a much more kind of big, all-encompassing manner.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to make, that, you know, they turn to like non-gendered words. For some of them, they keep the gendered words, and then some of it they don't. And so the idea of the sexualization of everything is a lot scarier to me than just the sexualization of women. Like that anything around us could be viewed sexually through like the eyes of the internet. So that's scary. Rule 63, for every given male character, there is a female version of that character and vice versa, and there is always porn of that character. Rule 66, everything has a fandom, everything. And Rule 77, the internet makes you stupid. So yeah, those are some of the rules of the internet that 4chan created.
You summarize that for me, Halley.
Yes, so in summary, I only showed a few of the around 80 rules, but in summary, the internet is like the opposite of a safe space. Everything people do or say can be used against them, and everything, like literally everything, is and should be sexualized. In this case, like nothing is beyond corruption, nothing is off limits. And like, who is this for? Who do we want this? Why do we want the internet to be this way? Why did they create the rules of the internet to be this way?
It's such a good question, and that's like the first kind of place I go to is like, who's missing, right? What identities are missing from this? And so one of the things that we've kind of talked through and noticed is that although race is completely absent, like this is definitely a racialized list, and that the invisibility of whiteness signals something, right?
Yeah, so it's like the race and gender usually in the form of like whiteness and masculinity is assumed. So like if you are white, the idea is that you lack race, even though you do have a race, it's white. But whiteness and masculinity societally is assumed. And I think that's what's going on here. The lack of racialized terms is just meaning that this is a white space. But I think gender is being specifically discussed because it's for the benefit of the people online. They don't have to talk about anything else other than whiteness because that's the space they already exist in. And there's no benefit to them to discuss race, but for them, discussing gender is for their benefit because they want the objectification, they want the sexualization. It's for their, I don't know, because they get something out of it. That's how I viewed it.
Super interesting, right? So like race doesn't exist, gender exists, but only for women.
Right.
And then there is an assumption of sexuality. I don't know if anyone picked up on this, but there is like some heteronormativity embedded in this. every given male character, there's a female version of that character, and there's always porn of that character, right? So even not just heteronormativity, but this like adherence to the gender binary, right? So non-binary people, queer people, non-white people, women, the list goes on and on, but there are a lot of identities that seem to be missing from this, specifically when we look at the assumptions embedded in like who's missing, right? And who's missing in a kind of underlying assumed way. And I'm really, to me, this is us again going back to Foucault, like historicizing the present, questioning historicizing the present, questioning what's assumed, and then using these understandings to like further the nuances around these cultural artifacts that we have.
Right. And I think these like rules of the internet, a lot of them were created as jokes, and like they talked about like Chuck Norris jokes and stuff like that. Like it wasn't completely serious in its conception, but like the rules that we just pulled out clearly have things that are still important today, that we still see through the internet today, that is still constructing the internet as the space that we use. And whether they meant to do that or not doesn't really matter, because it is something that we still see go on today. So yeah, I think even if it was made as kind of like a silly joke, it still really encompasses our experiences.
Definitely. Do we want to talk about maybe some of the things that we see still around today? Like the first one you mentioned, Hallie, about don't feed the troll.
Right.
I think you mentioned this when you were going through the rules. I see that one all the time today. Wait, I think it's funny too, in like a post Donald Trump world, to think of trolling on the internet, right? And the role that that plays in our internet lives today.
Absolutely. And like every time you interact with someone on the internet, or you read comments, or like you see someone post, you have to say like, first of all, is this a troll? Like it's our immediate, like it's in our mind to walk through that question before we continue going through the internet. It's just like ever present around us. And some people troll for fun. They're like, yeah, I'm an internet troll. Yeah, I do troll. Like people are like proud of that identity too sometimes. So it's definitely something we still see today.
Interesting too, because back to what identities are missing, I think of like who's impacted the most by trolls. I don't have the research on this, but I'm gonna assume that it's already marginalized, vulnerable people. If you want, like, we can pull those studies. And so it's interesting, right? Because like the assumption is that those identities are missing from the internet, but also my assumption is that those identities are like the people who are impacted the most by something like trolls, right? So the erasure is playing a role here, and at least continuing the pattern.
Trolls also can have a very specific, like a specific role outside of just trying to be like silly and weird on the internet. It can be for like people's erasure and to make them not feel safe in online spaces. So I think that was a really good point to bring up, is that they can have a function outside of just like the haha silly trolls. It can be like actually forcing people outside of to leave spaces.
We see it. We see that all the time, right? Especially in the Twitter world, where the news can spread pretty quickly when people are pushed out of spaces. So yeah, I think it's interesting how much this like loops back around to like almost like our first thoughts as sociologists. Like they kind of become validated as we continue to analyze this.
Oh, I was also going to add that they can also kind of be a scapegoat. So if someone is getting hit with like honest like feedback, like constructive feedback, they could be like, oh, these are just trolls, you know, like people don't actually care, these are people just like trolling me. So they can also be a scapegoat for bad behavior. If people are calling 100%. Someone out, you're like, oh, those are trolls.
Yeah, we see that all the time too. Oh my gosh. Yeah, definitely. The other comment on here that stood out so much that I think we have some personal experience with being podcasters on this podcast is the rule that women don't exist on the internet. I think we got a YouTube comment on one of our episodes that exemplified this. Hallie, do you have that comment?
I do have this comment. So in case you didn't know, we also post our episodes on YouTube if you want to check that out. But something fun about YouTube versus Spotify is that people can comment. And so we got a comment that said, and I quote, "Okay, 3 chicks, immediately disqualified video. All chicks would sell their friends or soul for $1." They also spelled immediately wrong. And their anonymous username was foreskin, the number 4, and then skin in all caps. So we outwardly see this like women shouldn't exist in our comment section as women trying to discuss like social inequalities and important issues, which I thought that comment was like really funny. Like I just kind of like took it as like, oh wow, that guy is like, that person is stupid. But it's clearly like we don't exist here, or we shouldn't exist here, and we're trying to be told to get out. GTFO.
Right, or our existence is like to, I don't know, exploit men, right? Like that kind of victim framing at the end is really interesting. We don't have to go too deep into that, but we definitely, right, the idea that women don't exist on the internet, especially as, you know, academics with degrees and things to say, and the internet being a space where things to say are spread, it can be kind of frustrating and daunting to do our work, right? To produce knowledge and then spread that knowledge in spaces where we are literally told we only exist because we're trying to make money off of men, right?
Right.
Thank you for saving that comment, Hallie, just for posterity.
It was like one of our first hate comments, so it, like I wanted to like frame it in my room, but it perfectly encapsulates everything that we're talking about on here. And it also just like, you know, what else should we be doing on the internet besides this? Like, why can't we talk about these issues? Like, men are allowed to talk about issues that are hurting them. So like, it's just as frustrating that we as women can't talk about issues, because why would women do that? There's no reason why women talk about the issues. They're just doing this for money, which is very interesting to me.
And I want to know where all my money is, honestly.
Yeah. And we are like a very new podcast with a very small following. Can you imagine what this is like for women with a major following? They probably get these comments constantly, and it's probably much harder to just be able to like, you know, like brush it off and like think of it as a joke. But like, that's something that is constantly happening to them.
Absolutely. The other example that stood out to me that is just so absurd is the idea that porn is made of everything. Yeah,
everything can be that. It's
no matter. Wait, I'm gonna read the rule. If it exists, there is porn of it. No exceptions. Rule 34.
Yeah, which like if you like look up like any Pokemon or any sort of like animated character on Google, like it will take you like maybe 3 scrolls to find something that is like extremely sexualized as that character. So like you see this all the time.
And the idea that like again, like the production of new media, like the idea that anything innocent, right, like will immediately be corrupted once it's in this space, corrupted via sexualization. It's pretty explicit, right? That's an explicit rule, and it's been carried out by people on the internet since
and we like don't really discuss the harm that can come from it. We just say like, oh, that's the rule, it exists, no exceptions. Sorry, that's just how the internet works. But like someone's creating that, like people are doing that, and we still like we have this disconnect between us and what is created on the internet. You know, if the internet is like this public forum, you know, it's not owned by one person. That means that we are the collective owners of this like public good, and that means that we are the ones controlling what goes up there.
And if the first thing we do is to like sexualize, you know, like a children's character, like I don't know, it says a lot, right? It says a lot about us as a society, what we value, what people expect is going to be valued in like our most prominent media space, right? Like Pokemon porn or whatever that is going to be. It says a lot when that's the first thing that happens, is the explicit sexualization, not just again of women, but of everything.
Yeah. Another one is, again, anonymous is a senseless, careless monster. We kind of discussed this one a good bit, but again, this idea that like we are anonymous, like we create these profiles, we are the ones using the internet. No one is going to change that except for us.
I also think of like a young person, like, going on 4chan for the first time or using the internet for the first time. And if this is the assumption that's given to you at, for me, it was like we were on the internet, what, like 12, 13?
Yeah.
I don't know how young we start now, but like if that is what you're told from the get-go, that here's your username and you're a careless monster, I mean, that's 100% going to impact the way that people interact with others, not just on the internet, but throughout their lives.
Right, absolutely. And then just like more the idea of like 4chan and the internet just being like lawless, like you can basically do anything. What kind of things have come out of 4chan being like this lawless place?
There were two things I want to touch on that I just tend to use a lot in my research and understanding of the internet, and that come out of 4chan, and that's Gamergate and the fappening, which I will definitely define both of those right now. Both happened in 2014, which is interesting to me. It's like a pivotal year in some of these things, like trends on the internet shifting. And so I don't know which one happened first or not. It doesn't matter. So the fappening was a mass hacking and leaking of celebrity nude pictures. And it was very prominent because people like Jennifer Lawrence nudes were hacked. And it spread through the internet like wildfire. That hacking and the initial spread is attributed to people on 4chan. The other thing I like to bring up is Gamergate, which seems to be the kind of first mass reporting, and I'll say cancellation, of something that is too woke. And it was specifically a video game and the video game's creator. There's a whole bunch of drama, accusations that she slept with people to get her game like media attention. But what that turned into was essentially an army of anonymous people online, mass reporting and harassing the person who made the game, Zoe Quinn. And so regardless of the ethics around her behaviors, this really is one of our first instances of like coordinated cancel culture being conducted on the internet. And this again comes out of 4chan. And so a lot of our coordinated cancellations we see today, like I don't think would be happening in the same way if Gamergate didn't set this stage for people to coordinate attempts to harass specifically a woman making a video game. And so that is my greatly reduced kind of definition of Gamergate and the fappening. But these are just two examples that are kind of big names that show up in my research, but just examples that are some of many of these kind of behaviors and the assumptions embedded in those rules carrying into real life consequences, and things that happen that have that harm people, right? Like physically, mentally harm people in real life outside of the internet.
Yeah, and it's interesting because 4chan's actual rule is that you can't break US law, but that seems like it's breaking US laws, especially when they like hack someone and then leak their like private information. And like how is this all allowed?
It's such a good question, and like there's a whole other conversation about revenge porn, right, and the history of those laws and how that's all relatively new. But what do you mean by how is this all allowed? Like are you talking big term or just revenge porn?
No, I guess like big picture, like so many people, we've all had like these traumatizing experiences on the internet. People have been harmed by the ways that these spaces are used. Like if some of this stuff happened in real life, like it would be illegal, like it would not be okay, plain and simple. And as we move online after like COVID, in the wake of COVID, we've moved a lot of our life online, whether that's our jobs or just how much time we spend at home, or just the amount of time we spend on our phones. People can have like screen times of like 5 hours a day. Do we want this environment that we spend so much time in to be like this? Do we not deserve like a dignified media environment to exist in? And I think we should ask, like, is this the space we want to be in if we're spending so many hours here, is this what we want it to be? That's my question.
That is a huge question that, like, where do you even start? Like, what could we even do about it?
Mhm. Yeah, and like I'm not even sure. I don't know where I fully land in the idea of regulating the media, especially the internet, and media regulation isn't new in any sense. So like to kind of sit through and talk through this issue, next episode, we're going to talk about the history of media regulation, specifically the history of media regulations in broadcast media, and then consider what that could mean for internet regulations in the future. And we'll kind of tie in our own personal experiences on the internet, and it kind of make us think like, how would internet regulations be possible? What would that even look like? What have experts said about internet regulations? So we'll see what that all means in the next episode.
Thank you for sitting with us as we historicize the internet and sociologize kind of how we see the state of the internet today. And we're excited to do the rest of this chapter as we dive deeper into the media.
Absolutely. And as sociologists, this is what we think of constantly as we're using the internet. So as you are doing that, just think about, ask yourselves these questions as you are now going through the internet. Think about 4chan's rules of the internet and how they connect back to what you see today. But thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you, Annie, for being here. And we'll see you guys next week. Yeah, bye.
Yeah.
Rule 15. The harder you try, the harder you will fail. Rule 16. If you fail in epic proportions, it may just become a winning failure. Rule 17. Every win fails eventually. Rule 18. Everything that can be labeled can be hated. Rule 19. The more you hate it, the stronger it gets. Rule 20. Nothing is to be taken seriously. Rule 21. Original content is only original for a few seconds before it's no longer original. Copy pasta is made to ruin every last bit of originality. Copy pasta is made to ruin every last bit of originality. Every post is always a repost of a repost. Rule 29. On the internet, men are men, women are also men, and kids are undercover FBI agents. Rule 30. Girls don't exist on the internet. Rule 31. Tits or GTFO, the choice is yours. Rule 32. You must have pictures to prove your statements. Anything can be explained with a picture. Rule 33. Lurk more. It's never enough. Rule 34. If it exists, there's porn of it. No exceptions. Rule 35. No matter how effed up it is, there's always worse than what you just saw. Rule 37. You cannot divide by 0 just because the calculator says so. Rule 38. No real limits of any kind apply here, not even the sky. Rule 39. Caps lock is cruise control for the cool. Rule 40. Even with cruise control, you still have to steer. Rule 41. Desu isn't funny. Seriously, guys, it's worse than Chuck Norris jokes. Rule 42. Nothing is sacred. Rule 43. The more beautiful and pure a thing is, the more satisfying it is to corrupt it. Rule 44. If it exists, there's a version of it for your fandom. Rule 45. When one sees a line, one must get in the car. Rule 46. The internet is serious effing business. Rule 47. The pool is always closed. Rule 49. No matter what it is, it's somebody's fetish. Rule 50. A crossover, no matter how improbable, will eventually happen in fan art, fan fiction, or official release material, often through fan fiction of it. Rule 61. Chuck Norris is the exception, no exceptions. Rule 62. It has been cracked and pirated. You can find anything if you look long enough. Rule 63. For every given male character, there's a female version of that character, and vice versa. And there's always a porn of that character. Rule 64. If it exists, there's an AU of it. Rule 65. If there isn't, there will be. Rule 66. Everything has a fandom. Everything. Rule 67. 90% of fanfiction is stuff of nightmares. Rule 77. The internet makes you stupid.